So Robert Mueller prosecuted Paul Manafort in two different ways. Once was for because he wasn't paying taxes, and the other was because he essentially didn't register as a lobbyist for the Party of Regions and for the government of Ukraine. And so he was found guilty on one of the trials, and then the other one he pled guilty. And we're at the stage of the trial where the judges are actually determining how long he's going to be sentenced to prison. So that's where we're at. We don't know what else could possibly come at him. There have been hearings where documents have been released where we've seen that Robert Mueller's prosecutors say that they're trying to pursue something about Manafort's relationship with his aide, Konstantin Kilimnik, who is Ukrainian and now lives in Moscow. And Mueller says that he's an agent of Russia. And so, but we don't know where that's going. We only know that that's something that the Robert Mueller people are still very, very interested in.
But what is the end of this story? I understand it could be kind of very long, but still, what we're waiting on this March, because somehow this investigation has to be over.
But we don't know when it's going to be over. There's lots of speculation in Washington and in the press about when this is going to end, but we don't know what's going to end. We know that Paul Manafort's going to prison now, and probably for the rest of his life. But there may be other things that Mueller's interested in. It seems like there are other things that he's interested in, and we just don't know where it's going to go.
Within this time we have been speaking, there were more details coming from Rick Gates. Like it's in a totally separate case. Donald Trump lawyer Cohen was really speaking about, the deals of current president with Russian side, wherever you call them. So by this stage, from the point of view what we know kind of, for instance, last summer, what we have found out about the connection of Donald Trump to the Russian, and as well maybe separately you say, about what kind of what Paul Manafort has been dealing and doing in particular with Konstantin Kilimnik, whose name had been popping up in the US media for the last kind of half a year.
Yeah. So here are the things we know that Donald Trump wanted to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, and that he was trying to do whatever he could to make that happen. And Michael Cohen says he would have done whatever he could to make it happen. And Donald Trump lied about the building of that project. And so the question is, why was he lying about this, and what was he doing in order to try to make it happen quicker? So that's one thing. The second thing is that we know that the Trump campaign was interested in getting dirt on Hillary Clinton, and they knew that WikiLeaks had it and that the Russians had hacked their computers, and we knew that the campaign was aware of this and that they were seemingly encouraging it. And then the third thing is, you mentioned Konstantin Kilimnik, and we know that Paul Manafort gave Kilimnik polling data, 75 pages of polling data that he was supposed to pass on to Renat Akhmetov and Sergei Lavochkin and possibly somebody else. But we don't know why that happens, or if Kilimnik gave it to other people. And so it's a little bit frustrating because all those things kind of suggest something deeper, but they also could just be the end into themselves, and not innocent, but maybe not the worst crimes in American history. And we're really waiting for the one person, Robert Mueller, who has the full story to try to explain how everything fits together and what's more innocent and what's less innocent.
So is there any date when we are looking or a deadline when Robert Mueller has to deliver?
No. There was speculation in the press that he was getting close to finishing, and that there were sources in the Justice Department who said that he would deliver a report last week or maybe this week. But we don't know.
And how about the other trials? Because there is another date of the March of 13th, so are we waiting something else apart from Mueller's investigation results and presentation of them?
Mueller could indict other people. And so we don't know. I mean, there are other people who say that they think they're going to get indicted by Robert Mueller who haven't been indicted by Robert Mueller yet. So that's sitting there. But the March 13th date is really just the date when Paul Manafort's going to learn how long he's going to stay in jail.
His lawyers are also saying now, and my question is also how often it's happening that the lawyers are saying that the special prosecutor is spreading misinformation and that his case is kind of singled out and politicized. How this discussion is currently seen and how seriously the lawyers of Manafort are seen in D.C.?
So Robert Mueller's investigation is very, very respected, and they've done a very good job of not leaking. They've hardly talked to the press at all, and only then in very rare instances to clear up what they consider to be dangerous misperceptions. But they've been highly professional, and even Republicans respect them for the most part. Not the Trump administration, but Republicans respect them. Manafort's lawyers I think they're fine. The biggest problem that they have is that Paul Manafort seems to lie to them and seems to withhold information from them. And they have a client that they can't really fully control.
You mentioned Konstantin Kilimnik, and as I mentioned earlier, his name popped up many times within especially the last half a year as allegedly a person connected to the Russian Special Service. What makes us believe so from what we know? And you also worked here on the story about Manafort. For you, you know who is Lyovochkin, who is Renat Akhmetov. You investigated a bit about the relations of Viktor Yanukovych with these Ukrainian oligarchs. So did you get some new information for yourself from this investigation and from what we learned about the relations between Manafort and Kilimnik? And especially the context after Viktor Yanukovych stopped to be Ukrainian president.
So Kilimnik was working with Manafort since about 2005, 2006. And everybody who worked with him in the past, all the Americans who worked with him in the past, would joke about him being a Russian spy. But I never really believed it until I saw Robert Mueller keep saying that they had intelligence that said this. And it wasn't, they kept mentioning it over and over again. We have intelligence that this guy Kilimnik is an asset of Russian intelligence. That's the word that they use, asset. And so I still don't exactly know what that means. But Manafort and Kilimnik began working for the opposition bloc after the Maidan. And Kilimnik was the primary person who was working with Lyovochkin at that time, because he was here and Manafort was spending more time back in the United States during that period. And he was working for, it seems like, people say that he was with Klitschko for various parts of this. He was working with another American called Sam Patton, who is also a political consultant. And he's been indicted by Robert Mueller, and which is a very interesting thing. People think that Mueller indicted Patton in order to get more information about Kilimnik, who was his business partner.
And also, I would like to ask you to clarify this sharing the information that Manafort has done with Kilimnik. When did it happen?
It happened on August 2nd, 2016, so in the middle of the presidential campaign. And so, again, we don't know why he shared that information. It could have been that he was, Manafort kept wanting to get paid by Akhmetov and Lyovochkin, who, after the collapse of the Party of Regions, they became not so great about paying their bills with Manafort. And so Manafort was always asking them for money, and he may have wanted more business from them. And so showing them inside information, he may have been like an advertisement for them to hire Manafort to pay him more money. So that could be possible. There's another theory, which is that the Russians were trying to use this information in order to shape their manipulation efforts in the United States. So if they're working on using Facebook to try to affect the election, it could be helpful to have the detailed polling data that Manafort supposedly gave to Klimnik.
And Frank, the overall question, because there are so many speculation about this case and kind of very general wording. For you, who is following the story for a while, knowing Manafort way before the kind of everybody had become interested, still the lawyers of Manafort try to say that everything connected in the real indictments are more connected to Ukraine, to money laundering, to lobbying for the foreign government. Have you learned more, and have we learned more about the collusion and connection to Russia with this particular case?
Only very, very little bit. I mean, we don't. I think that they're correct. The Manafort's lawyers are correct that we just don't know at this stage. I mean, there's still stuff that looks bad. Like there may have been collusion, but they haven't. The Mueller's people haven't proven it yet. They haven't even tried to prove it in court, and so maybe they don't have the evidence, or maybe they're just waiting to develop it a little bit more because it's such a complicated thing to prove, and because the stakes are so high. I mean, we're talking about, if the crime is true, it's really one of the most incredible things in American political history. And if you're a prosecutor, you don't just throw charges against the president of the United States. You really need to prove them if you're going to make them. And so I hate to say that we're still a little bit in a state of limbo, even after so many years.
And there were also publications on the possible kind of talk of Manafort with Donald Trump on pardoning. Is it really there?
Well, we know that Manafort wanted to get a pardon from Donald Trump, but we don't know that Donald Trump ever considered it. So if Donald Trump was considering pardoning Manafort, it would mean that he thought that Manafort had something important to reveal about him. That would be a very damning admission.
And of course, like a very general, I understand how difficult it is to answer this, but how the whole process at this stage, not like a year ago, but now in March 2019, is influencing the whole investigation, the American policy, maybe the American foreign policy, to what extent it's present in the public debates, and as well can have some kind of impact. Maybe you would just explain it to Ukrainian audience.
So it's the big thing that's happened is that Democrats won political power in the 2018 elections. And so for the first time, you have Democrats in Congress investigating Trump, really seriously investigating these questions about Russia and collusion. So that's one thing that's changed significantly. And in terms of foreign policy, I mean, I don't think it's actually affecting foreign policy very much. I mean, one example would be the Treasury Department wanted to relax sanctions against Oleg Deripaska, the Russian oligarch who was a client of Manafort's, and he comes up in the scandal a couple times. And you would think it would be stupid for the administration to try to look like it was showing any sort of favor to Deripaska, considering the investigation. And yet that didn't stop them from doing what they wanted to do. And so American foreign policy right now is a very confusing thing to watch because you have Donald Trump, who sets foreign policy with his tweets and with the things that he says in interviews. And then you have a bureaucracy that seems to be operating in a much more normal sort of way. And so you can have two things that go in different directions, where Trump says something nice about Putin, and then the government tightens sanctions on Putin. And so it's very confusing to watch, and it doesn't always add up.
And Frank, I understand that there is a limit to what the American journalists would dig into the Ukrainian oligarchs and the details. We tried to ask both Lvovchkin and Akhmetov on kind of the claims about their kind of stealing the money from Manafort, from Yanukovych to Manafort, for instance, or paying to Manafort. We asked the Renat Akhmetov company. They deny everything. Still at this stage, we're probably, from the documents we looked at, which were published by Mueller, Robert Mueller investigation, where still it's possible to look at the Ukrainian oligarchs at this case, because we really hope that this case would would bring us more information about, Ukrainian stuff, which we can go further. However, so far it doesn't look like that we have.
I disagree. I disagree. First, Rick Gates, when he testified against Manafort, he described how they would go to Lvovchkin for money, and Lvovchkin was the person who was paying them. And he showed, and you could see the documents in the trial, that it seems like there were shell companies that Lvovchkin had that were used to transfer money to Manafort. So that's something that's all through the documents, and Rick Gates explains it very carefully and in a very documented sort of way in the trial. And then you have memos that Mueller released where some of them that Manafort wrote to Yanukovych, which were really interesting, but there were others that he was clearly writing to Lvovchkin, both when he was chief of staff, but also when he was with the opposition bloc.